Okay, thank you. My name is Graham Tucker. This evidence is based on my involvement with the Hokianga wastewater treatment plant community liaison group. There has been a submission number 51 that's accompanying this, and you should have that document there based on the evidence and what was collected. The community liaison group was formed as a result of an environmental court ruling in 2009. At that point, John Clarisic was one of the founding members. That was before my time, but all the hapu were included, and there were some processes in terms of reference that were defined as a result of that environmental court ruling. My involvement was until Council discommunicated with the group around about the time of the application in December 2019. We had very productive meetings up to that point where we had monthly meetings, we talked about future developments, we talked about the problems, we reviewed performance data in terms of the coli levels, BOD and nitrogen levels. They were consistently exceeding the limits defined by the resource consent. We always voiced our concern about the breach of the abatement notice where the coli levels have been exceeded. But there were several other issues like the broken pipe that was not looked at until really the application and the hydrodynamic study was done following December 2019. So the broken pipe was never repositioned in the right position for a good, almost 10 years. And I think the biggest failing that the group identified with the council's performance is the lack of maintenance. We visited the plant on several occasions, and there were several problems that were very obvious. There was infiltration of agriculture and cattle into the wetlands area. There was weeds, and I believe that the wetlands have been weeded since the application was made for the renewal, but no maintenance really done on weeding, or very little, in that entire consent period, as well as the desludging was not frequently done. And I don't believe there was a process in identifying when the desludging was going to be done. So we're recommending that the term for the next resource consent renewal be based on the performance of the last term should be no more than 3 years. During the monthly meetings, we did engage with the water engineers, the council water engineers and independent water engineers to talk about other options, but really until the council can prove that they can conform to the metrics defined by the resource consent, we don't believe the term should be any longer than 3 years. There's an election in October. The two governments that's likely to be in power have very different views, and affordability for the area is very important. So that all has to be taken into consideration. We have multi-generational families that are being driven out of the area through increased rates. There's a lot of transients now coming into the area. Hokianga triples in summer. There is an argument for central government funding based on tourism, but we can't see the community disintegrating through families that have been there for generations being driven out because of increased rates. So that is an important dynamic, and that relates to the standards that are set. Whatever changes are made has to be done, with the whole of Hokianga involved. And we spent some time, the group, talking about a comprehensive study of the harbour. We did get some funding from NRC to scope out what that comprehensive study would look like. But definitely, the monitoring of the harbour needs to be expanded on. There's not enough data points collecting E. coli. The DNA source testing, there's very few data points available for DNA source tracking. The DNA source tracking showed very little human waste and a lot of agriculture, and that's one of the things that the comprehensive study could result, is that other problems could be in the harbour which prevent the community having safe seafood. There's plenty of other environmental problems potentially in the harbour. We were very supportive of a very comprehensive harbour study, a bit like the Kaipara, but different terms of reference. So basically, in summary, the future developments, we need to look at, land-based disposal. Not all areas suitable for land-based disposal. You need a gentle gradient and absorbent soils. Around Okanoni and Mapiri, that's a challenge. There are areas like Waifotafota with very sandy areas and a gradual gradient, so that would be a suitable area for land-based disposal, but again, cost has to come into it. But there are modern wetland designs that improve performance of the plants. These things need to be looked at. We strongly think that the community liaison group needs to be re-engaged and new terms of reference set for the community liaison group, so that it has powers to actually work with the council in a productive way, where we're just not going to be terminated and these environmental court rulings have been broken as a basis of that. So we don't want a term longer than 3 years. Affordability is quite key. And the comprehensive environmental study needs to go ahead to, and the maintenance processes definitely need to be reviewed. But there's more evidence within that submission 51. Are there any questions?
Yes, we do. You're like a racehorse, Mr. Trying to keep up, making notes. Yes, I do see that there's a lot of detail in your submission which we have read, but bearing in mind we've been preparing for the last couple of weeks leading up to this, so we're trying to hold it all in our minds. Interesting to hear your observation about the lack of maintenance. The sludge removal that went on and the disposal into the largest wetland at the back, did you get any involvement in that or any discussions with the council about that prior to that occurring?
Well, the desludging happened after the community liaison group was discommunicated, but we did interact with council engineers, and the question was asked, what triggers an action of desludging? And they don't have. The answer was basically there weren't enough staff to do checking around the district to trigger a desludging. So that raised alarm bells on just generally how processes work for maintenance. And the de-weeding, I think that was done after the application was done. When the group looked at it, the weeds were rendering the wetlands ineffective.
So, but prior to that sludge going into that back wetland, do you know if that wetland was being utilised prior to that?
Yeah, well, there were 5 cells originally in the design. One was decommissioned to be used for sludge disposal and other things. So really the design had changed, but there's no evidence about what the effect of reducing the wetland cells from 5 to 4.
And you visited the site quite a few times, Mr. Tucker?
Yes.
Are you aware of any spills or overflows from the pond?
I don't have any evidence of that, but I believe there was, and there was a problem with stormwater infiltration from the surrounding area. There was some work done to divert stormwater infiltrating the wetlands and the ponds, but probably there needs to be still some work on that. Whenever we get storms, we get plumages of stormwater coming from the wastewater outflow, and that's very evident in the photographs that I've shown in my submission.
So our understanding of that folder is there's a 60% trigger level, which lets the operator, the person responsible, know that we're reaching 60% and that we need to discharge at the next time. I'm not aware of any other triggers in terms of a high level flow or anything else that would let somebody know if they were going to overtop. Are you aware of any kind of triggers or alarms in the system?
No, I'm not. But definitely stormwater infiltration through the reticulated system and the surrounding area really needs to be looked at.
Yes, I should have reminded this morning, please, all phones off for on silent. And I also need to provide this morning, no filming, please, in proceedings. After yesterday's incident that we had, there was another film in the afternoon, so I'm going to continue to remind everybody, please, to not film except for at the front here if you've given your approval. Your submission is very clear, and I could ask you a lot of questions about what you've seen over the years, but I think the overall message is that things aren't great, and you believe there's really been very little maintenance done through the 10-year period, except right at the end before the application was lodged. So I understand that loud and clear. I guess what I'd like to explore with you is your vision for going forward in terms of a community liaison group. The applicant on day one actually deleted or proposed to delete those existing conditions of the consent in terms of the community liaison group, and have not proffered anything to replace those conditions.
Right.
And we have indicated on the side of the table that we would expect, if we were inclined to delete those conditions, that something else would go in.
Yeah, well.
So last night I spent quite a bit of time reading through the framework of the community liaison groups for Taipa, Kakoi, and also some of the orders that have been around, some of the consents over the years, which has given me a little bit more of an understanding of where those processes are heading. My question for you really is your reflection on how, you've said the group was working quite well. In your mind, what changes or improvements are needed to that framework and structure of the group to make it more workable going forward?
Yeah, I think the terms of reference need to be enhanced to give more powers to the community liaison group so that the council does have to act on the community's wishes. I think there needs to be another re-engagement between the community liaison group and Hapu and the rest of the community. There was good representation from members that had been throughout the duration of the terms of the resource consent, but some of the terms and conditions from the Rawene group would be useful to implement for the Open-Only group.
So you're familiar with some of those, are you?
Yes, yeah. I've attended many of the meetings.
And are there any things for the Rawene group that aren't working well, and again, improvements, hindsight's a great thing, isn't it? They look good on paper and then you start to try and do what the words say.
Yeah, I think the Rawene group has succeeded in engaging the community. They've done a very good job, and I think the challenge is to engage the community in a constructive way moving forward with the War Liaison Group and Open-Only Amambri.
You talked about a 3-year term, so in terms of the make-up, is that something really between the council and the community to decide? There's set the walls of the box and leave it to the community to sort out the representation. I noticed it on some of the terms of reference, it's very specific as to who is
I think there needs to be a review of the terms of reference, definitely. Going through them today is probably it's quite an exhaustive list, but using the terms of reference that were originally set out by the 2009 environmental court ruling would be a start, and then incorporating some of the terms of reference from the Rawene group. But, you know, in terms of the 3-year consent, there also needs to be a process adopted with the renewal that after 3 years, certain criteria was met, certain metrics were met. Maintenance processes, for example, were put in place to avoid more than 10-year inaction of anything.
Now yesterday, you know, I'm very conscious that there are different people in the room, and so I want to get the message across quite clearly that we are not going to dream up conditions on the side of the table. We are looking to the community to put forward what you think are workable solutions, and we don't profess to have more knowledge than the community. The applicant will put forward their conditions. We will circulate those to parties, and you will have the opportunity to have feed into those. But in as much as you can offer new conditions that you think would be better than what the applicant might come up with, then we'll go back to the applicant. They'll then consider what the community said, and we'll put forward what they are proffering, and then we at least have something to base our decision on. As I've repeated a couple of times during the hearing, we are only as good as the evidence that we're given on the side of the table.
Do you want me to take the action to give you a draft of the terms of reference that the group suggests?
So if you think that's a good basis, then I'd suggest that you know, people get together and try and take that forward and apply that to the situation.
Fantastic. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. And what's the time frame?
Well, we'll set that after this process, but what will happen is we'll adjourn the hearing tomorrow, and then we'll discuss where we go to from here. Obviously, we talk to the applicant. They may wish to push pause and even do some more consultation with the community over those conditions, or they may choose to put forward some conditions, and then we will circulate those and get the community's feedback. So how we do that process is yet to be determined, talking to the applicant after we hear from everybody.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The group strongly believes in clear metrics that are defined in this next 3-year term that have to be met. It's no good waiting for the last month of the 3-year period and then checking it. There needs to be regular milestones made just through the lack of performance.
Now, just in terms of that 3-year term, obviously we're doing a lot of thinking on the side of the table. We need to room. The applicant's evidence is that 3 years is needed to implement the first stage of the upgrades. Do you believe that's a realistic time frame of 3 years?
Totally, because before you start looking at upgrades, I think upgrades need to be considered in that 3-year term, but just to get basic maintenance processes established is a key requirement before looking at upgrades. It's no good implementing a new system when you can't maintain a basic design.
Yes. And then thinking about that 3-year period, and then thinking about what's needed in terms of building a relationship and building trust with the community, then we have a working group going forward. And then the next stage, actually doing the mahi of looking at the issues and options. Do you think that 3 years might be a little bit tight to do?
No, not at all. I think a lot of the groundwork's been done by the Rawene group, and I think we can leverage off some of the work there, and I think the working arrangement we had prior to the discommunication was very, very, very productive with monthly meetings.
So you think those two processes could go along parallel together?
Yes. The other thing we identified is that independent engineers are particularly useful in establishing what's required. I don't think the council has the experience that some of these independent engineers have that have done designs internationally.
Well, in fairness, I think we have one of those independent engineers in the room who is very experienced. Dr. Becky McDonald is very experienced, and she certainly is an independent engineer who's used by the council. think there is obviously some demonstration of the council there to use an independent party if they get in. I'm not saying the communities have the answer they necessarily would like, but this has to be put clear. So one of the things I've seen with this exactly this part of the process is the worst thing that we could do is set up a series of very short-term permits that basically just get you into the situation of going through another resource consent process, which is very draining on the community and drains funds that could have gone into the upgrades. So really it's just making sure that the time frame that is set and the milestones that are set are reasonable and workable and aren't setting people up for failure really. I have, in my experience, my own community has seen a series of 10-year consents and then finally 5s and 3s. And you know, kind of 25 years later we've got across the line. And some of that has been through resistance in that first 10 years to really commit to getting it out. You know, just that lack of acceptance that that's the end point that you're getting to. So that's really where my question was coming for 3 years. From my experience, it seems like a very realistic time frame to get the plant complying and upgraded to where it probably should have been 10 years ago. But it does seem quite a small period of time to not only investigate an alternative, but come up with an alternative and then be in a position to apply for consents for that. You know, a lot of large projects take 18 months to 2 years just to get, you know, the consent process and the design work and everything like that done. So I just leave that with you really, and I hear what you're saying about the 3 years, but...
Well, the other approach is to have a temporary extension to the existing with clear metrics that have to be met before the start of the next term. But going on for another 10 years where no metrics are met, you know, if it had been half reasonably executed on the last resource consent, there would have been a strong argument to go beyond 3 years, a 3-year term. But the performance has been so poor, there is no option but to limit to no more than a 3-year term.
I guess the interesting point of that is what the law would tell us on the side of the table is that if after 3 years of these things aren't happening, then there are tools and enforcement mechanisms available, and then it's up to the regional council to actually use those tools available to them. And I guess that's the other side of the coin here, isn't it? In your view, what role is the regional council taking in 10 years in making sure that they're compliant?
Yeah, well, some of the discussions I had with the regional council was that there were so many non-compliant, one of the comments made was there's so many non-compliant infrastructure plants around the district that they couldn't handle them all at once. So there was a queue of, you know, tackling one by one. And that to me is an ineffective controlling mechanism. There's got to be a way of cleaning this up. And, you know, Three Waters, if that ever eventuates, may not solve the problem either.
Yeah, kia ora. I think you've actually addressed the questions I had, and I was just really picking up on, you made a comment about a maintenance plan. There's no maintenance plan for the Waipunori plant. Yeah, but I think I've got from you the importance of that to give that clarity and certainty. So, no, thank you. I just wanted to...
Okay.
Well, thank you very much for your time here. Like I said, you put a lot of effort into the submission that sits beside what you said this morning in terms of documenting the history of what's going on and what all the concerns are. So thank you, and we will, as we go through our deliberations, we do go back to these submissions and provide to
yeah, well, the group is, you know, made up of 7 people, and there's hundreds of man hours, and they're all volunteer hours that have gone into it, and that's how important the community thinks of this to be fixed. And so, yeah, I think there's people in the community that want to put effort into this.
Yes. Great, well thanks very much again for your time, Mr. Tucker, not only today but in the last 10 odd years that you've been working in this job trying to make things as effective as possible, so we really appreciate your period.
Thank you.
and good morning to you, Commissioners McGarry and Commissioner Prophet, and kia ora koutou. My name is Roger Brand. I'm a resident of the Hokianga. I've been here for 35 years, so I'm pretty much a Johnny-come-lately. Thank you for the opportunity of talking today, and I'm going to let it be. I'm going to circumvent a little bit more around the issues that have been raised by numerous speakers, and so I haven't prepared a speech as such. So I'm going to ad-lib it somewhat because I'm aware that I don't want to repeat what other presenters have dealt with quite extensively. My profession, I'm a geoscientist as a profession, which sometimes is called a rock doctor. But now I've reverted to being an amateur. I'm in awe of water. As a geoscientist, you appreciate that this planet, as we know it now, wouldn't exist without water. As a scientist, we've got lots of wonderful stories of how it was 3.5, 4 billion years ago. We were given our complement of hydrogen and oxygen, and over that time, the oxygen has run around and grabbed most of the hydrogen. And subsequently, the Earth, the planet, Gaia, has used that water to give us what we know as the planet at the present time. And as an Earth scientist, I have to be aware, and I'm aware, of water's influence from tens of kilometres into the Earth to tens of kilometres into the stratosphere. And I even carry around a sample in my bag, and I'm glad there's a sample here in front of us. You know, other nations have thought about the sun and the moon as godheads. Strangely, we've not raised water into that level, but I revere it at a similar level. So these submissions, the submissions I've made both to the Opunoni wastewater treatment plant renewal and to the Kohoko one, they're my own views, although I've been informed by numerous discussions over the last so many years, meetings with the Opunoni ratepayers, the Harbour Care Group, and Te Māori o Te Wai. And you know, everywhere else. I'm somewhat disappointed that we've only been given 7 days to come back on the expert applicant witnesses. Now, 2 weeks ago we received those documents, the most recent ones, and essentially that just gives us 7 days to come back with a reply. And I note that the applicants in their latest submissions have largely itimised their it looks very much like an environmental court proceedings. So the fact that I was given 15 minutes to reply to this, I really don't quite know where to go, because I had hundreds of objections to most of the speakers and their corridor. And I certainly can't do it in 15 minutes, and I would need a projector and a screen, and most people just wouldn't work. So I'm sort of aware that we need, as appellants, we need to have the opportunity to reply to that most recent expert witness submissions. So in lieu of that, and I'm obviously subject to the Commissioner's decision on how we're going to go forward, I would suggest that as a short-term suggestion for how long as appellants we're given to respond to those most recent witness applicant statements. And probably also from what we've heard from yourselves and also from the submitters today, we're all better informed at the moment. Now I was pleased to hear Graham Tucker talking today. The last time Graham chaired a meeting was in this hall back in early 2019, pretty much at the time that the council put in the application for the Openoni and Marpuri wastewater treatment plant renewals, resource consent renewals. And that meeting came away with the motion that we would strongly desire the application to be publicly notified. So this was early 2019. Now, that submission wasn't notified until into 2021, more than 2 years later, at a time when being a part-time farmer and peasant, I was particularly busy. December, having to get your submission in the week before Christmas was an absolute dog. and I really resented that. And I thought, if you had 2 years in which to case this is in the hands of the NRC, the Regional Council, to make this publicly notifiable. There was no reason why it should have taken that long. Even worse is the situation with regard to Kohuko, with the resource consent expiring back in 2016. So eventually, when the resource consent was publicly notified, a full nearly 3/4 of a year after the Openoni one, at that time there was still not a CIA. Now that's 6 years later after the consent had expired. I'm really uncertain why this has happened, other than it's pure obfuscation by council, and the ability of being able to really completely ignore what the community would like to see happen. I've got to talk a little bit about Western science right now. I'll get it up front because, I've been steaming away sitting here over the last few days, and the way in which Western science is put over there. And I'm also in awe of Western science. Everything in this room, basically, all technology in this room has been driven by science that is an international, it has international study, and admittedly the scientific in this community, the scientific community in New Zealand is quite small. We know each other all round the country, especially in geology. There's only 1 or 2 of us. And there are very few organisations to actually do this work. Which really means that it's difficult to get independent witnesses, and the council have one of them, and several actually, with Dr. Beasley and Dada, doctors. But for us, for the appellants, to get expert witnesses, and I know we have a huge range of variable expertise within the community. But for us to call up expert witnesses is a difficult job, And the only way that we can rebuff and question the council's expert witnesses is by having people that understand the same discipline. Now, I'm getting a headache from reading QMRA reports.
It gives me a headache.
I mean, you know, the hydrogeology, the hydrodynamic stuff I'm quite into because I'm, you know, a part-time sedimentologist and I deal with sediment flow in water bodies, you know. So, I mean, I think it's incredible the response from the community here to the documents that the council have put up that I find difficult to read. And I've stated in my submission that I quite often have to deal with a range of reports to which I feel I can respond. But as I said, the QMRA leaves me quite cold. However, that doesn't mean to say that I'm not willing to offer an opinion on anything. I think there's a lot of legal stuff to this application and the ability of the NRC to award these renewals. And it seems to me there's a hierarchy of statutes, starting with the Resource Management Act 91, which then passes into, most recently, I'm a Labour Party supporter, so I absolutely take my hat off to what they've done in the last 6 years, foremost of which is to put on the table the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management. At the present time, that is our underlying go-to document. From then on, it goes into certain regional and freshwater plans and the proposed regional plan, December 22. Right? But at the moment, the NRC has a regional freshwater plan on the table, and on their website they are working hard to engage, or have been engaging with community as of latter part of last year with written submissions. And I see that they had around about 140 submissions from the community and from Northland community. Now, with regard to this resource consent hearing, I've forgotten the numbers now, there's been something like 220 submissions made on the Kahuko and the Marpri renewals. 200 of those were clearly opposed to the resource consent renewals. And I'm really hoping that the NRC hear our submissions, because it would be a large part of their community engagement. Now, the draft is due out in September of this year, of that NRC Regional Freshwater Plan. And maybe in that time, the message from this hearing will come through strongly, because I certainly think they should include the evidence from this meeting. It is particularly important to not only Hokianga, but also all the other parts of Northland. Now, I know this was dealt with a little just now by Graham, and talking about compliance. I've looked at the data from Open-Only over the last 6 years. And 50% of the time, based on the E. coli readings, it's non-compliant. If I read through and what's available on the NRC website, the compliance data they put up there for all resource consents in Northland on a monthly basis, it seems to me during that 6-year period that there's a lot of non-compliance, a huge amount of non-compliance. In fact, the CIA from Opunoni and Marbury treatment plant put the non-compliance at something like 80% of the time. And if you read the NRC reports, there's a lot there of non-compliance and semi-non-compliance. The council, the FNDC need to be, informed of what's going on and reply back on what actions they've taken. And this has just gone on and on. And I can understand the frustration that's been had by the community liaison group, because certainly during that period, the 10-year period that Graham was talking about, it was mostly non-compliant. But there was no comeback. We were not possible. It wasn't possible for us to take either the FNDC or the NRC to court. The difficult thing about trying to get data out of both FNDC and NRC is that it's very intermittent. And when you actually check the dates the monitoring was done, they don't add up. They're different dates in the FNDC reports and the NRC reports. The actual date for when they recorded the E. coli and other data differs. And you wonder to what extent there's any correspondence, any corridor between the councils, between NRC or FNDC. Last week I read in the paper that City Care Limited, they are an organisation owned by Christchurch Council, and they do the maintenance work for Clutha Council. And Judge Dwyer fined them $500,000 for lack of maintenance and exceedances on their resource consent for the 6 wastewater treatment plants in Clutha County. Now that's the first. I don't know who took whom to court at that stage, but I certainly feel that was a case in question for. It was no longer acceptable for these exceedances to go on. So I come back to compliance. What does compliance actually mean? I mean, what is it? We just have to exceed the E. coli levels? Or is it a general one that exceeds all of them, the suspended solids, the oxygen around, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, you name it? Which one of those, or is it a collection of all of them that put into that make the thing non-compliant? I don't know, it's not clearly defined. So I'm going to go to the end of my submissions and I'm going to say that I object to both renewals and I object to 35 years and 15 years renewal time. And as I said before, the legal aspects of it are in law. Everything else I think is opinion, but the legal aspects refer to consultation with Tangata Whenua, which is not in any conceivable fashion less than minor, the effect on Tangata. However, I think the investigation of alternatives is certainly less than minor. So those two, the Tangata and community consultation, and the investigation of alternatives, say land-based disposal, are clearly spelled out in not only the Resource Management Act and the National Policy Statement for Freshwater, but I've got a whole list of other statutes that the NRC has worked on for the last 10 years. Proposed regional plan, the regional policy statement, the consolidated regional water and soil plan, the regional coastal plan, they all mention the same thing. And from what I've heard at this proceedings, I think that we're over that hump. I think there is agreement that the council have neither achieved either. So I come back to compliance, and that's a lot to do with monitoring. And it's woefully inadequate in the harbour. You know, the harbour is the receiving environment. And there's so little data. The NRC has a monthly monitoring program at the Opanoni Wharf. It used to have, prior to 2008, end of 2018, a monitoring program at the other very favourite bathing locality at the end of Pioneer Walk, near the Marketing Wharf. Well, that was terminated, strangely enough, after it was found that the exceedances of E. coli had gone way over the top, and there was a notice put up advising people not to swim. And it coincided with several things. It coincided with the council removing a large amount of sludge, or desludging the Opanoni treatment plant. And strangely enough, you know, as I said before, they terminated that particular sampling location. A lot of this data is online on the LAWA's website, which I think is the worst website I've ever come across for getting any useful data, other than silly pictures and strange colours that really don't relate to very much at all. They are completely uninformed. So we go back to this monitoring thing. So, you know, exceedances are important. And not only are they a disaster, but they are something that you hope that you're going to learn from. I mean, what's the point of having a ruling if you just roll it over and go on to the next bad decision? I mean, and I'm not aware of anything or any time that the council offered any real mitigating measures that would address these non-compliances at the Opanoni and Marketing treatment plant. What I am aware of is that the council just recently have been providing Te Māori Te Wai with a monthly report, and this is from just Melissa Barlow. And it's an extremely helpful report. It actually looks at where the trends in data are going, and what maintenance and operational, requirements are actually being taken place. But that's taken to Māori or to Wai years to actually get that on the table. So with regard to the lack of monitoring or any real data within the harbour, other than, I must say, the one NRC sampling site right at the top in Utakura Valley at Okaka Road, that gives a really good idea of what the waters are like coming out of Puketi, basically, out of the highlands. Over the last 6 years, they've had an average median average coli of 250, which is on the edge of the NPSFM. You've got to watch what you're doing. And that has to be due to land management in the heart of the forest and hinterland. But anywhere else, we don't have any data. Now, I've written here, lack of evidence is not evidence of a lack. That's a truism which is really important here, because the onus really should be on the council to prove that they are not having an effect. Not circumstantial or indirect evidence based on fancy computer programming. I have a real problem with both the hydrodynamic and the QMI, which is based on the hydrodynamic report. And the hydrodynamic report is fantastic, is a fantastic piece of computer modelling. 10 years ago we couldn't do it. There wasn't enough grunt in your average computer to carry out that sort of work. And to some extent there was a bit of a reality check, because they had 5 monitors, 2 of which actually took the velocity of water down into some depth, maybe 15 metres, down into the channels, so they could actually measure the flow rate both on a flood and ebb tide. But as pointed out by other speakers, your output data is only as good as your input data to these fancy models. And I'm not aware that they really took into consideration anything to do with the winds and the waves. Now, the waves are driven both by the winds and also what's going on out in the Tasman Ocean. So both wind and waves can work opposite to ebb and flow tides, with them and against them. Now, I'm an avid gardener, and I take every opportunity of going down to the beach by the mouth of the Waiarahia stream to collect seaweed. It's where all of our community collects seaweed. There's great mountains of it there. Now that seaweed comes in from outside of the harbour. It's clean washed into the harbour and up onto the beach. Now, I'd say it's probably got a density and a flotation index of approximately the same as untreated sewage. Now, that doesn't sound very good, and maybe I shouldn't be collecting seaweed from a position slightly upstream of the wastewater outfall. But I've been doing it for a number of years, and what I find extraordinary is the fact that the mounds or the deposition of cast seaweed onto the beach is quite unpredictable. It's not driven by a particular wind or a particular tide, but it's probably due to the fact that maybe I'm not living actually on the coast, right down the coast, and maybe my acute monitoring observations aren't quite as accurate as should be. Now, maybe I should ask some other people about why it is seaweed's on the beach, Monday, Tuesday this week, and then there's a whole month and there's none. And then it's back again. That's a whole other issue altogether. So yes, we've got wind and we've got waves. And wind drives waves, and the ocean drives waves, and they can work independently. And so these two other factors weren't included in the hydrodynamic study. And I think they're particularly important when you're actually looking at freshwater plumes, which, if I get it rightly, they are more buoyant than seawater. We were talking about the wedge, the salt wedge the other day. That fresh water will essentially rise to the surface and be affected by surface phenomenon, not necessarily the overall fetch of the current. So if I look at some of the data from the hydrodynamic work, I know that there was a picture showing I think they took data over a period of about 6 days in July 2020. And you can see that basically the average flow rate up here on the harbour was round about 0.5 metre a second, round about 0.4 metre per second. Now, over the 4-hour outgoing tide period, that would only take you along down harbour, maybe I haven't written down the numbers, round about 5 kilometres. You wouldn't get a quarter of the way between here, the mouth of, say, the Waima River, where the Kaikoui treatment comes down. You wouldn't get a quarter of the way between here and the heads before the next tide came in. And it really begs the question of the importance of retention times for anything within the harbour. Now, if I wanted to know what was going on, I'd get a truckload of little semi-floating baubles, and I'd tip them off the wharf down here, and I'd watch I'd pay everyone who finds them on the beach a couple of dollars to come back and tell me where they got to the following week when I put them in there. And so that's what I think that's a reality check. It's the most obvious way of doing it. Now, a lot of other sedimentologists will do it on beaches to watch and quantify longshore drift, and the other way, the way that tides work. But as I said before, the lack of evidence is culpable. So my next heading is business as usual, or the complete absence of it. And the only constancy is, at the present time, is change. But look, it's not just change that's important, and we all know it's been happening forever. Every generation thinks that they're the right generation. But it's the rate of change which is the most important thing. And since the Kahuko resource consent application, or the resource consent fell over in 2016, we've had almost 50 parts per million increase in carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. And that's making everyone very focused on the effects of climate change. I don't think business as usual is applicable here at all. Now, if you look back at Well, I was going to look back at slightly longer geological history, but I'll try to not do that. But the way that the world evolves, and that's us included, and all species, and the way the Earth evolves, is what's commonly called punctuated equilibrium. We've passed over what Darwin originally thought, which is a series of incremental changes that eventually lead to speciation. But these days, we feel that within a certain time frame, there's a lot of equilibria, and then there's a major jump, because there's a significant change in conditions. And at the present time, there are certain tipping points that we're getting very close to. I don't even know whether we're there at the present time. And that comes back to the way in which you collect your data and what you do with it. Now, I'm not a statistician, and I know that you can prove what you like out with statistics. But I know that all the statistics that go into these resource consents are based on a log normal curve. Has a single median and a single mode. Now, in times of constant change, it's possible that you've got several modes. You've got a high end and a middle and a low end. And I certainly, as a farmer, I certainly know that, because during this period of La Nina over the last 4 years, 3 of those years on the west coast, we've had a drought. And this year, we've had something slightly different. All under La Nina. I'm not sure what that's telling me. All I know is that whatever's coming next, I'm not a good, yes, well, most of my life I've been involved in trying to predict for the companies that I've worked for an outcome, and I'm very rarely correct. So there's a fair amount of hubris that needs to be kicked down the road here. So monitoring. I think the only way that you're going to really get a handle on those types of changes and the ability of being able to assess statistically anything meaningful out of them is to have as much data as possible. And I'm going to go back to the acute observation that people talked about yesterday. And the more you know, the better informed you are. And I would certainly suggest that one monthly period, one monthly monitoring exercises just don't cut the mustard. Most recently, the Riverwatch, based in Queenstown, have come up with this lovely little, made out of milk bottles, this pod called the Whopper. And it's fantastic. You can moor it in a stream, and it will give you real-time readout of clarity, suspended sediment, potassium, conductivity, temperature, nitrates, a lot of things that otherwise you'd have to go out with your bottle and take samples. So every 15 minutes you can get a readout from this little instrument, and you can have a little bit of a GPS next door to it, and you don't even need to be anywhere near it. You can sit at home with your computer and you can download this stuff as it goes ahead. The only thing it doesn't do is FIB. It doesn't do anything to do with bacteria or any other pathogens. And that's a bit of a procedure. You've got to go take them away and go and grow them and get your culture to work. So we're all the time having to work with proxies to decide on the type of environmental effect. or in that sort of monitoring. I'd like to suggest that there should be several of them. I'd like to moor one 100 metres downstream of the outfall at Rawene and at Hokianga and a few other places up and down the Hokianga harbour. It's what we're doing in Wamamaku to do with the land care group there for the Wamamaku River and tributaries. So let's go back to alternatives. I think there's three things I've written here with regard to alternatives. One we realise that there are alternatives to the current treatment system, and there has been talk at this meeting about electrocoagulation, which certainly knocks out a lot of the pathogens that we are concerned about, that the present systems or varieties of treatment don't deal with. The output from the EC unit is significantly better than anything else I've had a chance to study. So then there's land disposal and the varieties of land disposal, and then worm farms to deal with the sludge. And I think Judith Franken will talk about that. Is it tomorrow? With regard to the land-based disposal, I'm glad you've been up to the Opunoni. You've been to Hokianga as well. Yeah. I'm glad you've been to Opunoni because I want to talk about the Waiarahia stream and the valley. And I recognise and acknowledge Ngāti Korokoru as mana whenua. And but what I'm saying now at the moment is my own vision of what I see there. I've been there a lot. It's a very, very, very extraordinary catchment in itself. It's a short-headed stream, comes from the mountains, 400 metres high, beautifully bush-clad mountains, down a steep stream, all within the bush, onto a flat, a kilometre, just over a kilometre there into the sea. The fresh water from there is beautiful, and it's been used by the Marae and the local Hokianga water system for a number of years. Now, the whole of that valley is important. From a land-based disposal point of view, I've been back through the various reports, originally from VK Engineering and subsequently McDonald and then taken on by Jacobs. And when you go back and look at the data that they put out, it is completely wrong. First of all, the gradients of the slopes. Now, there were concerns that they mapped out. They have a map of those gradients on the left-hand bank as you're looking up the valley, the north side bank, of greater than 15 degrees. Now, I've been back through the data on the council website showing, I don't know whether they've run a LiDAR survey up there, but there's a very detailed topical survey. Now, if you take that, the average slope of that northern bank is between 10 and 12 degrees over quite a large area. Like I'm talking about 50 hectares. I'm not talking about a small area of 10 or 15 hectares over quite a large area. So I don't know how, having read that and been back through that, I don't know how much faith to put in anything else. Then they tell me that the soils are completely wrong. They're clay-based soils. Now, everywhere in Northland's got clay-based soils, and some are more permeable than others. And I know the most impermeable soils in Northland are those that are either run over by stock or vehicles. In Northland, the stock pug up the soils here disastrously. I've stopped running beasts because they do the same thing on my farm. And it's just the nature of a clay-based soil. Doesn't matter how much sand or silt or cobbles you've got in it. The clay gets pugged up if you work it over. So on the left-hand bank that I'm talking about, which is Wayne Baker's farm, there's half a dozen wild cattle in there, but they managed to reduce that whole paddock, which is about 150 hectares, to pug most of the winter. You know, you can hardly walk across it. It's like craters of the moon all the time, and each little crater has got a bunch of water in it. In contrast, over the fence, a little bit further up the stream, the native bush there, which is probably regrown from possibly 100 years ago, 100-year regrowth. If you walk through that bush during periods after intense rainfall, there's hardly any groundwater at all. And if I was going to plan a land-based discharge, I'd certainly want the plants to help me in improving the permeability of the subsoil, the soil and the subsoil. Because they certainly do that within the bush block. You know what the roots do. They break up the soil. They go down a long, long way into the soil. They immediately improve the permeability. And I know that elsewhere in the country, land-based disposals are based on beautifully permeable soils, valley bottoms, that you can get in there and you can sprinkle out your effluent and you can take your crops off it. And, you know, there's a huge organic turnover. This isn't the situation here. We have to be far more informed with silviculture and how it works, what trees we can plant there. I'm a part-time silviculturist. I've got ideas of what I'd like to plant there, but it doesn't happen overnight. Even with fast-growing tea tree and adventitious shrubs, native shrubs, it would take 10 years to have a receiving environment that would work satisfactorily for a land-based disposal. So what have we been doing for the last 4 years? Not a lot. We might have been 4 years ahead. Higher up the Rawene stream on the valley, on the right-hand bank, just along from Hokianga Road, there's 70 hectares there exotic forestry that was planted by the council back in the early 80s. And I think at that time there was an intent to possibly use that forestry as a repository for the wastewater treatment plant. There were strong visions at that time, but I don't have written data to prove that. I just know the guy that was involved, who was responsible for that original plantation of both pines and eucalypts. Now, 40 years later, these trees are quite big. Some of them are this large. It should have been harvested 10 years ago. Typically, pines and eucalypts shouldn't really be there for more than say 25 or 30 years. Now they've reached the stage when the Far North District Council needs to take those pines out. That's going to have, well, I don't really know what you do with exotics. It's currently a big problem, a huge problem. I think I'm going to leave it there. But
I saw a big London track. Do we assume that all the trees at the moment go to North Port, is it?
Well, the thing about
We don't want the
thing about trees here, unless the metric price is up there in $190, it's not economic to drive you 2 hours to Whangarei.
Yeah. So that is the closest port out.
Yeah, it's the only. It's the only one.
Sorry to interrupt. It's a question out mind.
All right, so I think I've been around there, and I'm saying the Waihori here is, I think, the only sensible option for dealing with land-based disposal, and there has been no consultation with community or Ngāti Korukoru with regard to that option. So as I said before, I wish we'd started 10 years ago, because not only do you actually need to get in there with your early stage plan of what you're going to plant to effect reasonable irrigation and disposal of quality effluent, but you also need to start an early monitoring plan to know what you've got before you get the next thing. You need to know what effect. You need to have monitored that freshwater stream to know what effect your irrigation is happening. Right, I've got to go on to the next thing, and that is, where do we go from now? And it's to do with funding, because one of the main things that Council come up with is the unaffordability of a wastewater treatment plant, especially since Jacobs have managed to ramp up the estimated cost of $17 or $18 million. In my submission, I deal with the spuriousness of a lot of the values used in that report. But look, I think the interesting thing is that times are changing and funding is changing. Te Māori o Te Wai are able to now put into plan the establishment of an ECU based on funding from the Better Off Fund, which comes from the Three Waters or the Floor, or whatever it's called these days. And I'd like to think that maybe there's still going to be money from central government to deal with the problem that we have, as well as many other wastewater treatment units throughout the whole country. And no doubt that's part of the $150 billion that they've written in for the capex for that sort of thing. The other thing that's hot on top at the moment is the rewards from planting trees to gain carbon credits. The ETS has come out, and surely if we're going to create a wetland that has trees that has the ability to accrue carbon credits and actually be able to make money or to contribute towards the financing of the unit over a period of time, hopefully quite a long way into the future. The other thing I've been looking at is the call has come from a number of people in the Hokianga, and that is to work towards Hokianga as a marine reserve. Now, a lot of people have said, look, we don't need it. We just need to be good kaitiaki of our own environment. But the point of a marine reserve is the fact that suddenly it opens up opportunities to access funding. You know, World Heritage status for Waipuru would be fantastic. But with regard to this marine reserve, but then I look at what's happening next door in Kaipara with the Kaipara Moana remediation program. Now admittedly, it's got both Auckland and Whangarei as major contributors, but they've had $300 million put towards that project for over the next 10 years. This is a fantastic project. What have we had in Hokianga?
Wow.
So, looking forward, and I was most distressed to see that the community liaison group had been expunged from any renewals, and so I concur with what Graham has just now said. There's a bit of history there involved, and essentially I carried on with the ratepayers group in Opanoni after the Opanoni and Marpuri wastewater liaison group was disbanded for no real apparent reason, and it's currently and was then in the hands of the lawyers or their legal system to sort out how or where it was going to go. But I'd certainly like to see it reconstituted. Right, I'm not going to go on much longer. I think I've been going on too long. But I really would like to read out the conclusions to the addendum to my report on Marpuri Opanoni. And in it I say, in the event that FNDC application for resource consent renewal for a further 35 years is declined, brackets, and deferral or postponement of proceeding is not granted, then I see the following as desirable. An interim consent for a maximum of 5 years is granted from the time of expiry, i.e. the 31st of August 2019. So that actually only gives us another year and a bit, so we better get a move on. The FNDC to forthwith establish a meaningful dialogue and partnership with community, the new CLG, and iwi that it's not under the tutelage of the council and would provide guidance for subsequent fieldwork. The FNDC to carry out the work of investigating options for a culturally and ecologically acceptable land-based wastewater disposal option. The FNDC to instigate a geotechnical and plant-based, this is green stuff plant-based studies that would inform the architecture of a land-based wastewater irrigation scheme. The FNDC to carry out remedial environmental work within the Waiarihia stream catchment, comprising riparian fencing and weed eradication, ecological study of the stream and tributaries, redesign of the weir to allow for fish passage and migration, and lastly the development of land management plan that encompasses the pine and eucalyptus plantations and their harvest. Next, the FNDC to investigate further options for an Opanoni wastewater treatment plant upgrade and or alternative treatment system, such as electrocoagulation, the establishment of a seawater sampling site within the footprint of the OOWWTP outfall to measure pathogens. Now, I don't know how you do that in the marine realm, because you're after enterococcal as opposed to E. coli, and other water parameters on an outgoing tide, and synchronous this sampling with water sampling from the marsh discharge, and that's at site 101580. Re-establishment of the Pioneer Walk seawater sampling site to measure E. coli concentrations during the summer months of frequent summer bathing, as already occurs at the Opanoni Wharf. And I think with regard to that, I would now insert a few extras since time has passed. It's been a year and a half since this report was written, and I did read it through the other night and thought, but I haven't reread all the reports that came from council, and I have to take my hat off to you commissioners for doing such a splendid job of listening and reading everything that's put to you. Kia ora. Thank you.
Kia ora.
Away.
face, so I could. It was lovely. I can tell you really should be a forensic accountant. The first thing I wanted to address, and it's not really by way of explanation, but it's really whether there's any recourse. It's really what you raise about the applicant not meeting the 10 working days, and I suspect 3 extra working days would not have been enough either. And unfortunately, the law and those timeframes, I think, are not sufficient in cases like this. You know, for a one-day hearing with little evidence, it's the same time frame as for a hearing that might go for 3 weeks. Unfortunately, that's how it is. Same for us, we get 15 working days, whether it's simple or whether it's something where you've got evidence to the ceiling. I was very surprised for the applicants to ask on the day the evidence was due for that extension, and I very much had the community's interests in heart when I allowed that extension, but the only other alternative would have been to postpone the hearing, and I felt that it wasn't in the community's interest to postpone the hearing with all the efforts and things that had gone into meeting this hearing. So I hear what you're saying. I am of a mind when we do the circulation of the consents that there's some matters that are raised during the reports that you feel you haven't had the time to just question. Then I think it would be okay to do that. But I suspect your conclusions and your answers and everything you've said to us would not change if you had had a month to go through the applicant's reports. So that's very much where we came from on this side of the table in terms of those procedural matters and that request that came in. In fairness to the applicant, I do know that one of the key expert witnesses suffered a very close family bereavement in the week of preparing the evidence, so I don't think it was a tactic on the part of the applicant. And it was a very sad situation for them. So in terms of my questions, I've got a lot, but I suspect your answers are all come back to the last part you've just read out to us and what you want to hear. And all I can say is what I said to the previous speaker is I encourage you to bring your intelligence and your what appears to be reasonableness to the next phase of the hearing, which is looking at the conditions, putting aside the duration of consent, but putting that focus from this point on the conditions going forward. So kia ora, thank you very much. And the detail in your submission alone, how you fitted that into 6 pages, I'm not sure. Commissioner Potter.
No, just a comment, you used the full page of every page of your submission very well. In terms of filling it, so thank you.
But just before you go, I'm going to direct a couple of things to the reporting officer. I'm not expecting that she's going to answer, but it's just going to give her a heads up to tomorrow, and she may not be able to provide it tomorrow, but we will be expecting it. One of the things we alluded to yesterday was the compliance record for both sites, which the regional council is going to provide us with. But I also just raised some flags for the officer in terms of we would like to understand why in 2018 the state of the environment monitoring the Rawene Ferry wharf site was stopped. And the other matters that we also talked about yesterday is I would like to understand from the regional council's perspective as to whether sludge disposal into the wetland system was authorised under the existing consent. Whether sludge disposal into the Rawene system from other areas is part of the consent. So thank you very much, Mr. Brand, for that. And we will break for a cup of tea. And I know it's awfully hard to get this large room of people through for a cup of tea in 15 minutes. And in case nobody wants to come back to me.